Hi, I'm Willow.
And I'm Parker.
And this is Still Processing.
So today we want to talk a bit about something which has been on both of our minds, and that is how news articles, especially the article, "Tennis's Top Women Balance Body Image with Ambition" from before 2015 Wimbledon, used omission and selection of sources to portray Serena Williams' body type as unfeminine and unfavorable to other women. This Wimbledon in particular was significant because this was the win that made Serena Williams the oldest woman to win a major singles title in the Open era.
So right off the bat, you can see the bias in the title of the article, "Tennis's Top Women Balance Body Image with Ambition." The writer uses the word balance, which implies that body image and these women's careers are equally important. The article from the get-go is basically stating that whether or not these women's bodies fit societal standards of what a woman's body, quote-unquote, should look like is just as important as their career.
The fact that they phrased it in that way made it seem to me as if they weren't taking her seriously just because she was a woman athlete, and women are supposedly the only people that have to go through body image issues while also being successful and recognized for their success in a professional sport.
Exactly. So near the beginning of the article, they introduce Serena, saying Williams, who will be vying for the Wimbledon title against Garbiñe Muguruza on Saturday, has large biceps and a mold-breaking muscular frame. So in my opinion, there's a lot wrong with this. They mention the Wimbledon, but not the significance of it, thereby completely brushing over her athletic achievements to instead focus on her body type compared to the other women. They then use this first description of Serena's body as the basis for the rest of the piece. All of the quotes by the other female tennis players are centered around basically why they do not bulk up in the same way Serena has. Serena's strong build has helped her a lot in competition, so the main question was why other female tennis players don't do the same. They then proceeded to use quotes solely by other women who have chosen not to bulk up because they worry it'll make them less quote-unquote woman, or quotes from players who are talking about how self-conscious their muscular frame makes them. This is biased by omission, as they use no quotes from women who are confident in their body, making Serena seem like the only one, and pitting her against these other women, adding to the idea that Serena's body type is somehow unfeminine or undesirable.
Yeah, the entire focus of the article is skewed to show that women don't want to look like Serena, which I understand is not at all the point the authors were trying to make. But in the way they showed Serena's side, and then all the other women athletes who chose not to bulk up, pushed such a degrading message. The continued omission of any other women in the tennis world who does choose to bulk up besides Serena is also a way to drive the point home that Serena is the only one, further isolating her from her competitors.
Yeah, and they do similar things throughout the article. Later, the writer states that, quote, Williams, 33, who has appeared on the cover of Vogue, is regarded as a symbol of beauty by many women. But she has also been gawked at and mocked throughout her career, and she said growing confident and secure in her build was a long process. So at first reading this, I think that it's good that they mention she's in fact a symbol of beauty, of body positivity for many women. I felt like that was taking a step in the right direction towards more subjectivity because they were showing both sides. However, they immediately follow it up with how difficult it was for her to gain body positivity, and how many people have had the completely opposite negative reaction to her, which instead focuses on the difficulty of becoming body positive for her instead of her end goal, which is being incredibly body positive. And then the fact that the writer used the term gawked, in my opinion, is the biggest piece of evidence of bias in this piece. The word gawk is often used to describe how people react to something or someone unusual or strange. It's often associated with the zoo or circus, and it makes Serena's body seem like some oddity you would find at one of these places.
I completely agree with that, and how the word choice had such a negative connotation to the article.
The main form of bias used in this article is bias by source selection. As I said earlier, the only quotes that are body positive are from Serena. All other quotes are from female tennis players who have either avoided bulking up to remain quote-unquote feminine, or quotes from women who are talking about how self-conscious or uncomfortable their muscular frames make them. A good example of this is the quote from the coach of Agnieszka Rodzinska, stating, quote-unquote, "It's our decision to keep her as the smallest player in the top 10 because, first of all, she's a woman and she wants to be a woman." This quote just barely sidesteps directly saying that muscular bodies are not feminine or that women with muscular muscles are no longer, quote-unquote, real women. All of the quotes are along these lines, so how could the writer argue that in choosing these quotes, they're not creating a piece stating that Serena's body and any woman's body that looks like hers is no longer feminine? If all of these quotes have the tone of women worrying that their muscular bodies make them look unfeminine, and there are no quotes contradicting that, or no quotes from those same women saying how proud they are of their bodies, then the general tone of the article becomes that muscular bodies are not feminine, or all women are ashamed of muscular bodies. There's no other side other than Serena contradicting that.
So after this article released, there was a lot of backlash, and the New York Times published an article titled "Double Fault in Article on Serena Williams' Body Image." The first thing I noticed was the question mark at the end of the headline. The fact that the writers put it there showed that they might not feel as if they are in the wrong on this topic, and phrased their, quote, apology as an open-ended question.
Source selection is definitely a big part of the bias in this piece. I think they faked a subjective approach by including those tweets and quotes, but the real sources that they actually focused on were the people that they were actually talking to, all of whom were involved in the creation of the article or do not see an issue with it. That's a complete bias in source selection because none of these people are going to present an opposing view to each other. They're all on one side, and so they're not going to balance each other out to create anything close to subjective.
Ben Rothenberg, the author of the initial article, says that he, quote, should have challenged the norms rather than just stated them as given, end quote. Even if he didn't mean to offend in the writing and publishing of this article, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to get offended by it. The article also includes quotes and tweets from many sources who publicly disagreed with what the Times was saying, but those little inclusions distract from the fact that they are just making excuses not to seem biased.
I agree that it could have been possible for the quotes from the other women to not have looked like such an attack on Serena if they'd been organized differently. Also, I think if they'd been supplemented from other quotes from the women that were more body positive or talking about more why they made the decision to, even if they felt self-conscious in their bodies, to still bulk up because their career was important to them. But instead, they focused solely on these quotes of them talking about how self-conscious they were. They also, with the organization of the quotes, they focused first on Serena, then proceeded to use the quotes from the other women in a manner that came across as pitting Serena against the other women.
A couple days later, New York Public Radio picked up the story and released, quote, NYT sports editor defends Serena Williams coverage, trying to defend the New York Times point. At minute 3 and 3 seconds into this recording, Jason Stallman, the editor for the New York Times, says that Serena Williams, quote, covers her arms when she's in public sometimes because her arm muscles are so big, end quote. When Serena is quoted in the original article saying that she covers her arms to keep from being recognized in public rather than because she has a problem with them. Other women also did not explicitly say that they didn't want to look like Serena. They just said they didn't want to bulk up. And I feel like the writers put an entirely unnecessary spin on that. The choice made to add quotes from many of the people who disagreed with the message of the article, but not bring them on the show to discuss their side of the story, is another way that this whole strain of articles is incredibly biased.
Yeah, it really is appalling. I think it's already problematic to have a man report on a woman's body issue, as he has no deeper understanding of the issue, and therefore it'd be difficult for him to write a really comprehensive or sensitive article on it that would be in any way unbiased, as we have seen. Source selection, I think, also really comes into play here again, as they only are using the point of view of men who support the article. Perhaps another source with opposing views could have pointed out how the way he structured the article did not simply, quote-unquote, let the women speak for themselves, but instead took a very antiquated stance on the issue. Claire Potter also never said that the issue should not be discussed, as Stallman states. She was simply stating that his handling of the issue and the quotes from the women were disappointing. In his quote, he's making it seem as though he were being attacked, or that people were saying in criticizing his article that we just shouldn't be talking about the issue at all, when in fact they were just criticizing his treatment of the issue. So in this quote, he's definitely trying to shift the narrative from how he messed up into more how people are trying to silence this important issue.
Later in that article, Stallman is asked to respond to a response tweet from Claire Potter of OutHistory.org, where she said, quote, "I don't know why I am surprised that the New York Times would publish a piece that supports female body hatred, that a male reporter would support such a narrow beauty standard for women, or that women's tennis players would be proud of their endless willingness to be gender police for each other. But I am," end quote. At 4 minutes and 18 seconds into the recording, he responds by saying that he was, quote, "astonished that people think we should ignore the issues. The Times wasn't taking a stance, but letting the women speak for themselves," end quote. That statement and a following statement about him and his colleagues laughing about their chief editor publishing Potter's statement come to me, at least, from a very ignorant standpoint. The fact that the Times is talking about making a mistake, but the fact that they aren't necessarily acknowledging that they did anything wrong is very concerning to me. That public statements can be made by men on behalf of women's body image, and that they can get away with just saying these things. There was clear omission of any statements that were possibly made by the women interviewed for this article, in contrast to what was being said in the article, and the Times not choosing to include these is a clear example of selection of sources.
I think we can say that overall it's disappointing to see such a biased article come from such a well-known and trusted news outlet as the New York Times, and to have it come out in a way attacking the body of someone as amazingly talented and strong as Serena Williams. It's just disappointing and quite saddening.
The Times' choice to write this article was grossly misjudged, and the way they tried to backpedal their argument just led to way more trouble. The bias showed throughout this article shows how misjudged and misrepresented female athletes are and how they're treated in media.
Okay, well, I think that's all for our show. Still Processing is a product of the New York Times.
See you next week.